Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast today from Trinity Beach, Queensland, Australia, the talented author and illustrator Andrew Matthews, who has inspired millions with his insights on happiness and success. Welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast, Andrew. It's a real privilege to have
Jürgen,
you as my guest.
thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Now, your journey is an interesting one, transitioning from a law degree to becoming a professional artist and author. And you've written over 12 books, including the best-selling Being Happy, which we can see the poster behind you, and also Bouncing Back, the latest work. I'm really looking forward to digging deeper into both of those today, particularly the secrets to resilience and how we can take greater control of our happiness. I think that's one of your core messages. Before we do that, Andrew, let's start with the impact you aim to make in the world.
I aim to share simple strategies that can make everyday people feel that they're in control of their happiness and more in control of their future. And I do that by writing simple books filled with cartoons. I might even say I probably write self-help books for people who don't like self-help books. And um, I began with one book, and that might have been it, but such was the reaction from readers. It wasn't an instant thing, Jürgen. I went to 17 publishers before I found a publisher that wanted Being Happy. But once we got started and first released my books in Southeast Asia, then we progressively went into more and more languages. And then my wife became my publisher, and she grabbed this thing by the throat. And now we're in 48 languages.
That's fascinating. Well, I'll come back to that idea a little bit later on because I did make a note of that very point and exploring that some more. But let's start with the fundamentals, I guess. Um, you write a lot about happiness. So, what does happiness mean to you, and what do you think are the most common misperceptions people have about happiness? Because there's a lot of sayings, I guess, that you hear a lot around happiness or success as well. It's if this happens, I'll be happy, or if this happens, I'll be successful. If that, if that, if that. So,
Absolutely. So for me, and anyone's definition can be different, but here's what it is for me. It's waking up every morning being happy that I'm me and not wanting to be anybody else. I think that's the foundation. It is feeling that I'm making a contribution to the people around me and the people that I care about. And that might be my family, my friends, the people I work with, feeling that I'm contributing to making the world a better place. And thirdly, but equally importantly, having at least one person to love and who loves me, hopefully more. So if we're happy with who we are, we feel that we're making a contribution, and we have some people in our life that we can love and by whom we are loved, then I see that as a pretty nice start to happiness. So what are the things that the misconceptions in terms of happiness? I think firstly is that we're going to be, as you said, we're going to be happy when we finish high school, when we're finished university, when we get a promotion, when our boyfriend starts acting like a grown-up or whatever the case may be. We have to say, today is my day. Happiness is a decision that we make every day. And sometimes it works better than others, but we find in life what we look for. If we wake up every day and say, today is my day, I'm going to be as happy as I can possibly be. I'm going to look for good things in me and in other people. And I'm going to understand that everything doesn't work, but very often um, disasters and disappointments are turning me into the person I want to be anyway, because as someone wise once said, we never want to go through the things that we need to go through to become the kinds of people that we want to become. And so often those things that we thought were breaking us are actually making us. And that's a point that I make early in my book, Bouncing Back. So those are a few thoughts for starters, Jürgen.
Mhm. That's excellent. I love that idea that the things that we need to go through to become the people we want to be are the things that we try to avoid. And I think it's a wonderful reframe if there's something that happens to us that is a little outside of our control. And rather than sitting back and feeling sorry for ourselves and saying, well, why do I have to go through this? Or why is this happening to me? To reframe that and saying, well, okay, how do I deal with this? How do I get to the other side of this challenge, this setback, and looking at it as part of this is part of me becoming who I am. So
Yes,
talk to us a little bit more about that concept because that's all about resilience, isn't it? And
it
building
is.
that
Well,
resilience.
it is. No one is born extraordinary. We become extraordinary by facing challenges that we didn't choose. And so, if we can have that in the back of our mind and we're all bouncing back from something at any point. We're bouncing back from eating too much or spending too much, or bouncing back from the promotion that we thought was ours that we didn't get, or maybe we're bouncing back from losing a loved one. We're all, yeah, constantly challenged. So the first step, and I talk about this in bouncing back, is acceptance. It is that um, happy and effective people are able to say, well, I wouldn't have chosen this, but I understand that I'm going to learn something and I'm going to come out the other side of it better equipped and perhaps a more useful, more effective, more productive, maybe more loving person. Um, and the the reverse is that, people who say, when my life gets easier, then I'll be happier. And that was me. Um, when I was 25, I made a shocking discovery. And I discovered that the happiest people I knew had bigger problems than me. And that made no sense because I
Yeah.
was waiting for my life to get easier, at which point I would be happier. And I discovered people who were struggling to get through cancer that had a better attitude than I did. I came across people that had lost loved ones that had a better attitude than me. I came across a family whose house had just burned down. They were the happiest family I ever met. And I had to recognize that, and this is something we've all heard, but it's true. It's not what happens to us, but it's how we think about what happens to us. And our happiness is very much a result of the questions that we ask ourselves. Like, what do I like about my life? What do I like about my job? What do I admire in my friends? What's one good thing about living in this house, in this city? And according to the questions that we ask ourselves, so we find what we look for. And there's a cartoon in one of my books where I say that happy people focus on what they have, and there's an accompanying illustration of a happy guy with one slice of cake,
Mm.
and unhappy people focus on what's missing. And there's an illustration of a guy with a whole cake minus one slice, and he's
Yeah.
looking very miserable. And we've all had that experience. We've maybe been to poorer countries where we find people that have so little, that have such an extraordinary attitude and such an appreciation of life and love and family.
Mhm. Yeah, that's right. And again, as you say, It's an attitude, isn't it? So the question of when will I be happy or I'll be happy when, there's a hint there because it's a being, it's a state of being, isn't it? Which I can choose because we all choose our state of being at any given time.
It is. And what led to my first book being happy was in part the realization that there was a day in my life, it was the 19th of October, 1983, when I realized that a lot of people around me were happier than me. And I did a kind of a check on how my life was going. And romance, not very well. Uh, Plenty of money in the bank, not very well. Was I enjoying my work? Not that much. International travel, zero, and a lot of other things. And I thought to myself, I've had a blessed upbringing. I had loving parents. I've had it easier than a lot of people that I know that are more joyous and have more direction and are more generous than I am. And I realized that I needed to change something now. And my life changed that day. The trajectory of my life changed that day. I can see that that was a starting point for me embracing more opportunities, um, uh, being kinder to myself and other people. And as a result of that, everything changed. But I guess in a sense, I learned or finally understood that to be happier, we can either change the world or we can change ourselves. And
Mm.
I discovered
Yeah.
that it was easier to change
Yes,
me.
exactly. Yeah. I'm fascinated you remember that date, and it's quite a while ago. It's over 30 years. So, was there a particular trigger or event that happened that, had you focus and inwardly reflect?
Well, it was an accumulation. It was just a realization. In the back of my mind, I'd felt that I would live a happy, adventurous life. And I thought, as maybe many of us do, that I will do some things that are a bit special. And and I thought, yes, well, it hasn't happened yet with my current strategy. And here's the interesting thing, and I think, Jürgen, that many of our listeners may relate to this. That the day I made that decision, suddenly I began to attract people and opportunities that helped me to reshape my life. So it's like the universe was waiting for me to make a decision. You move and the universe moves. You move and circumstances and people appear to help you, but you've got to be serious. And I believe that is true for all of us, for whatever it is that we're wanting to achieve. If the moment we say, I'm going to get that degree, no matter what it takes, we are going to make this relationship work, whatever it takes. We are going to take that special vacation and we will find a way to do it. When we get serious, magic happens. It doesn't mean we don't have to work.
Yeah,
Well,
that's right.
it doesn't discount effort, but it does mean that there's a shift.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, I mean, the key is like you say, you do have to work, but there is that shift. And the key for me is once you start talking to people about it and share your excitement and your vision, you'll start to attract people that say, "Oh, I can get on board with that," or "I can help you with that," or "I can connect you with somebody that can help you with that." Right? It's
Well said. And some people say, well, what I'll do is I'm going to be successful first. And as
mm,
soon as I'm successful, then I'll focus on being happy. And you can't do it that way because happiness is our foundation. And as you say, we become happier and we attract people that want to be around us. and we notice opportunities and we have a little bit more confidence and we like ourselves a little bit better, and that's important. People say, do you need to like yourself? Do you need to love yourself? Well, you do need to at least like yourself, because we create the life that we feel we deserve. And if I don't like myself, I will stay with a partner who treats me badly. I might stay in a job that I hate for 20 years. I might create arguments with everyone I know because I think I don't deserve to be. And I
Mm.
will let opportunities pass me by. And it's not a conscious thing, but
Yep.
it's a subconscious thing where we think, it's only me. So as soon as we get focused on, I'm going to find ways to be happier, to have a better attitude, to notice qualities in myself and my friends, and ask myself questions like, what do I like about my life? And we become happier, then we begin to operate more effectively. I mean, we solve problems like 22% faster when we're happy. Happy doctors diagnose illnesses 30% more accurately. So we need happy doctors.
Okay.
It-
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting when you said that, because I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, and I'm not sure if my my doctor maybe listens to this podcast. So sometimes he can come across as a little grumpy. Mm. It's interesting what you mentioned there about liking yourself or loving yourself. I mean, we're both from Australia. Oh, I lived in Australia most of my life. The the there's this, I don't know whether it's an attitude in Australia, right? It's almost a negative if
yeah.
somebody you say they love themselves, and there's even worse expressions that you use, but it's almost an
Yes.
insult, isn't it?
Yeah. And raised eyebrows and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And
And I think it's important to distinguish, because that insult is directed at somebody who perhaps it has narcissistic tendencies. So that's not what we're talking about, right? It's not,
no,
there's a difference between that, and we're talking about an empathy towards self as well as an empathy towards others.
yes. So the interesting thing is that people who tell you how good they are generally try to convince themselves. And
Yeah.
so, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a very deep sense that we deserve a happy life. And we're talking about the ability to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. One thing that we can do is we can get a little photograph of ourselves when we were 3 years old, when we didn't have all the answers, and when we were just living life the best way that we knew how. And we keep that photograph on our desk, and we treat ourselves as we might treat that 3-year-old,
Hmm.
because we still don't have all the answers and we're still just living life the best way we know how.
Mhm. Yeah, and um, there's an uh, approach in NLP where you say, the fears that hold us back from doing stuff are essentially the inner child trying to keep us safe. So that's I really love that metaphor, because you're externalizing that inner child in some ways, and saying, well, I'm going to look after that one. And of course, part of that looking after is cherishing that being, or that entity, whatever you
Yeah,
call it,
very
which
much
is
so.
you as yeah.
But we have to deal with that, how it is that we see ourselves. And the interesting thing is, as soon as we start to forgive ourselves for not being perfect, then we start to forgive the people around us for not being perfect. And
Mm.
that's really helpful. And they
Yeah.
appreciate it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, one of the things you talk about in bouncing back, of course, is this idea of visualizing how we can improve after disappointment. And you talked there a little bit because it's kind of, I see two things here. So there's the external thing that happens to me. So the house burns down. You used that example earlier, which is a pretty significant setback. And trying to deal with that and trying to bounce back from that and still be happy is pretty challenging, I would imagine. The other side of it, though, is we do something and we mess up. And that, to me, is also something we need to bounce back from, right? That's kind of part of resilience, and it's also part of this idea of being happy and loving ourselves and forgiving ourselves. So talk to us a little bit about how we can deal with both of those things. What are the common themes?
Sure. Well, a big part of creating a better life is continuing to focus on who we want to be and how, what kind of person we want to become. And we don't become better people or stronger or more resilient or happier by looking at who we are. We become better people by focusing on who we want to be. And so if we make that a part of our daily habit, if you like, that we continually focus on where we're headed, then we become what we think about. If we were to talk about, for example, you want to change something about yourself, and I say, Jürgen, do you think is it more important for you to have willpower, or is it more important for you to have a clear goal of what you want? And you don't need to answer because it's a trick question. What I would move you on to, it's a trick question. What I would move you on, you see yourself. Plenty of people have a lot of will. You want to lose weight, you want to get fit, you want to save money.
Mm.
Willpower is a trick question. What I would move you on. Having a clear goal. You can say that I want to be thin, or I want to be rich, or I want to be in a good job and well paid. But until you actually can see yourself there, even a clear goal in your head is not enough until you can see that that is you. And so that is a point that I make in bouncing back. It's so important that we continue to see ourselves as we want to be.
Mm. Yeah, and also that focus on being rather than doing, right?
Yeah.
Because I see willpower is kind of like a doing thing. Okay, I'm not going to go to the
Yeah.
cupboard and grab a
Yeah.
snack now.
Yeah.
That's willpower, and it's something I'm doing. Whereas if I say, well, I'm a fit and healthy eater, and um, that means I eat healthy, so therefore going to the cupboard and grabbing a snack right now isn't in that frame. So I've got to continue to be that fit and healthy person. And yeah, so it's a mindset shift, isn't it?
And it's, I mean, we become what we think about if we want to
Mm.
make it that simple. And until we can see ourselves as the person that we want to be, then it's a tough road.
Mm. Yeah, you also talk in the book Bouncing Back about gratitude quite a lot. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of gratitude in resilience and in
Absolutely.
happiness.
Well, in simple terms, gratitude is so wonderful because you can't be grateful and angry at the same time. Try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't be grateful and miserable at the same time. And so we get back to that cartoon that I referred to earlier, that happy people focus on what they have and unhappy people focus on what's missing. And so uh, um, I talk about, for example, negative thoughts are like rats. We get one negative thought, and before we know it, we're surrounded by them. And the question is, so if we just get onto that wavelength and maybe it's like you're driving to work and you're stuck in traffic, and your first thought is, oh, I hate this traffic. And then now you're set up for your second thought, I'm always in traffic. And third thought is, and my family doesn't even care that I'm stuck in traffic. And fourth thought is, why do I always have to do everything? And then next thought is, and I've got to do the vacuuming tonight, and I've got to cook. And my mother always told me I was marrying the wrong person, and now I've got a headache. Maybe it's a tumor. We get onto one wavelength, and it's one negative thought after another. So we say, how do we beat that? How do we stop the negativity? And it's through gratitude, and it's by saying, well, hey, what's one good thing about this? And we can always find something. We say, well, what's one good thing about being stuck in traffic? Well, you've got time to listen to podcasts. It's better than walking. It means your car's still working. It means you've got a car. And we might say, well, that's just being childish. But the fact is, lousy things happen to all of us. Inconvenient things happen. Disappointments and even tragedies happen. And resilient people have the habit of saying, what is one good thing about this? That's their go-to thought when disappointment, disaster, the secretary quits. I knew of a guy, an entrepreneur, who whenever something would go wrong, he would say, like his secretary would quit or he'd lose a big client, he'd say, that is great. And I don't know why. Recognizing that there's something good about it, and I'm going to find it at some point. And in a sense, we have to do that.
Yeah. It reminds me of this speech I heard recently where the theme was, it was sort of a motivational speech, but the speaker kept coming back to this saying he had. He said, I see something in you, but I don't know what it is. And it was like very positive, right? Because I'm going to find it. Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, yeah, those of us that are watching on video can see those cartoons behind you, and you use a lot of humor and cartoons in your books to illustrate your points, to emphasize your points. I mean, apart from the fact that that's what you derive enjoyment and pleasure from, how do you see the role of humor in delivering those messages and helping people to deal with what might be pretty difficult emotions sometimes in dealing with, some of those setbacks could be pretty traumatic, I imagine.
Yeah. Both having illustrations, cartoons, and having something that hopefully is going to be funny. It breaks up. It makes my books at least approachable. And a woman said to me the other day, well, she wrote to me and she said, my husband, who hates self-help books, picked up your copy of Being Happy from the coffee table, and he's been quoting you ever since. So what I do, and for those of you who are listening and haven't seen my books, if I've got a book with 160 pages in it, then there'll be a cartoon on every other page. Won't fill the page, but it's enough to make a point that is consistent with what I'm writing about. And it's a message that sticks with people. And very often I'll run into people and they say, I still remember that cartoon you drew of the iceberg and the guy that was in the little boat, for example. Or uh, there's a cartoon in Follow Your Heart where there's it's in a dungeon and two guys are hanging by their ankles upside down, and one guy is hanging right way up by his wrists. And the guy who is hanging right way up says, I sometimes ask myself, why am I the lucky one? And so, I mean, again, that's kind of the idea of there's always someone who's worse off than us. But and so, Jürgen, when I present to corporate and I speak to banks like HSBC and ANZ and Commonwealth and many banks, or when I speak to surgeons or brain surgeons or financial people, or even when I go into prisons and I speak to the prisoners, I draw cartoons because we're visual. We want to relate a message to an image. And I guess it's also a bit of a break because a lot of people that go to seminars are, just looking for something different than either PowerPoint or just a talking head. So I have a flip chart and I draw, these big cartoons as I talk about happiness being a decision, or I talk about enjoying our work.
Wonderful. Well, if you could create a cartoon that encapsulates the essence of happiness in just one single frame, what would that depict and what message would you want it to convey?
Well, the little guy that's on the front cover of my book, Being Happy, is what I wanted as a simple illustration with no caption. And it's really difficult to have a cartoon that looks like he's actually jumping. Until you start doing it, he looks like maybe he's stuck on the wall or something. And so I drew that little guy, and you can see him behind me. I drew that little guy over 200 times until I found that he was an encapsulate. And for those of you that are just listening, it's just a little guy who's leaping in the air with a wide open eyes and a big smile on his face. But it seemed to work because when those books went into the bookstores around the world, people responded just to the cover and were taking home the books of this unknown author that was me. There weren't a lot of books about being happy either when Being Happy was released.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned early on in the conversation that your books have been translated into 48 different languages and it's published in many different countries. What do you think is key that this message resonates with so many different cultures and works in so many different languages?
Happiness is important to everyone. That's number one. Number two is people want simple messages. So when I write, I imagine that my reader is 12 years old. I mean, my readers aren't 12 years old, but I think if I can write a sentence, every sentence, that if I look at that and say, would a 12-year-old understand the point I'm making? Then people are so relieved to read books that are clear and don't have long sentences and big words. The thing that I'm proud of is people often will say to me, readers will often say, may sound a bit weird, they say, it's almost like you've been looking in my window. So people feel that perhaps I understand the challenges that they're dealing with. And I think I think those are the main issues, and there's humor, and a lot of people are intimidated by books, and so I wanted my books to feel more friendly. There's a bit of white space in them. There's cartoons. There's headings so that people can dive into one bit or another that takes their fancy. You don't even need to start from the front. You can just see a chapter that's about the subconscious, or it's about enjoying your work, or it's about um, relaxation and meditation, or something like that, how to feel better. And they'll start reading that chapter, and then sometimes they start at the back and read to the front. You can still do that.
Hmm. Excellent. Well, it's fascinating, and we'll talk about how people can get the books a little bit later on. But I think it's a good point now, though, to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions that I ask of every guest, and the idea is you'll give us some insightful answers that will inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today, or to continue to be awesome. You ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I think, firstly, we need to uh, relax, because we get inspiration when we're not stressed. So I'm most innovative at 4 o'clock in the morning, when I'm just sort of drifting in and out of sleep. Um, I think that we need to do things that we're just in love with, passionate about, that because innovation is work. I mean, in my
Mm,
experience in writing books, it's hard work, but it's a wonderful thing. So we need to be doing something that is something that we love to do, and we're not doing it to impress anyone, or we're not doing this thing because we think it's something that we ought to do. And I think we need to be prepared to be wrong. Sure. In terms of how I work,
yeah.
um, what I will often do is, I will, like, for example, if I'm creating a cartoon or I'm writing a book, then the number one thing is that I start, and I never worry about starting at the beginning. I start with it, whatever I have. So, for example, when I write a book, and okay, it's probably more difficult to do this with fiction, because maybe you've got to have some
Mm,
kind of story that's going to work. But for me, if I'm writing nonfiction, or even if I'm writing a speech, the idea is you make a start. And once you make a start, that's when the ideas start to flow. It's the same in creating a cartoon. My father was also an artist. And when he was teaching people to draw and paint, and he would see people who were like paralyzed before their canvas, and
yeah.
he would say, make a mark, make a mark. And that is it. You just, by making a start, then you've got something to bounce off. And that start may very well turn out to be the worst part of the whole thing,
Yeah.
but it enables you to make that second and third decision.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I always find that um, to get some sort of framework, even if it's just the kind of one little bit, like making the mark, is so empowering because,
Ye-
okay, I've made a start. I'm on the way.
Absolutely. I heard, no, I read a book about writing comedy a long time ago. And the author said, so he's obviously a comedian. He said, the first bit of a joke that I write, he says, I call it a jokeoid. which lets me off the, it doesn't have to be funny, but
Yeah.
it's the beginning of a joke. And then I work on those jokeoids and they become, so in other words, and this is what I like about the idea, we're giving ourselves permission to take a first faltering step that doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard writers say very similar things. I don't know, was it Ernest Hemingway that said the first draft is always, and it was a four-letter word, but it was rubbish. All right. Now, what's a favorite resource you use most often?
Well, uh, if I'm drawing cartoons, I've got some books of my favorite paintings, which I will often look through. Um, I will sometimes, if I'm looking for an idea to create a cartoon, I use Google a lot. Just, I'm trying to create an image in my mind, and I say, okay, like for example, some guy in a dungeon, or if I'm drawing a cartoon of a guy in a dungeon, and then from those ideas, then sometimes it's a way for me to develop that. Um, I guess that would be it.
Mm, okay, it's fascinating. And who's your favorite artist?
I have many. Probably
Yeah.
John Singer Sargent. He was a British American portrait painter,
Mm,
and because I was a portrait painter before I was a cartoonist, so I studied classical drawing. And
hmm
and John Singer Sargent had that extraordinary ability to capture the human head in very few strokes, and with such authority that he's one of my very favorite.
mm. Okay. Well, I know the name, so I'm going to have to look up
Yeah, you look
some
him
of
up.
his work. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a project on track?
Well, the way that I do it is I always have a checklist. So as soon as I start something, I make a list of all the things that I need to do, and I have it on my um, in my jobs list in my computer, so I can rearrange it. But I keep on adding all the little sub headings to the headings, and I just make sure that I keep ticking down the list. So I mean, it's not a very romantic system, but lists
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think lists are very underrated. Right?
Do you
I
use
use
lists?
lists all the time. I mean, I sort of
Yeah.
do them in. Yeah, absolutely. Mm. And I have systems where I dump everything. If I think of an idea and I dump it in the list, and then I can add to it as I think of more things that could expand that idea. And then, of course, it becomes a list that I can work off once I decide to implement that idea. Mm.
Every book I've written, and I've now written 12, has been based on lists. So um, what I do is I first make a list of everything that I think is going to go in the book. It doesn't matter whether it's represents a chapter or a paragraph or one sentence idea. I write that first list, and then what I do, and I have it in a loose leaf folder, and then I have all the other sheets of paper behind that, and everything that appears on the initial list has its own page. And then I write subheadings underneath that. And then I start to get an idea of, for example, whether that next page is going to be a chapter or a paragraph or something. And whenever I want to
Mm.
actually sit down and write, I grab the page from within that folder that has the most points on it, because that seems to be the thing that the subject that maybe I know most about where I'm going with that. It's all
Yeah.
based on lists. And then at the end of that, I just rearrange what I've written into some kind of order
Mm.
or lists.
Fantastic. Great strategy. All right. Well, final question to the buzz round. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves
I think be authentic. Just be who you are.
and be happy with that?
Well, I think that's the bonus, isn't it? When
Yeah.
we're authentic and we just suddenly discover that we not only we're being who we are, but we like who we are.
Mm. Excellent. Well, great. Thanks for getting us through the buzz round. Now, where can people find out more about you, about the work you're doing, maybe even get in touch to say thanks for what you've shared, and most importantly, where to get a hold of your books?
Thank you, Jürgen. Well, I have a website, andrewmatthews.com. So that is Andrew, and Matthews is spelt with 2 T's, and there's no dots or anything between the Andrew and the Matthews. I do a newsletter every 2 weeks that consists of a cartoon and maybe about 60 words. I like to keep it brief, but I like to keep it inspirational. All of my books are on Amazon. Being happy, follow your heart, bouncing back, how life works, happiness now, and so on, in ebook and also in hard copy. So if you go to Amazon and Google Andrew Matthews or bouncing back, being happy, they'll come up for you. 2 of my books are in audio format. So if you like books read with an Australian accent, then bouncing back and follow your heart.
Right.
I've done
That's
those.
fabulous. And yeah, and you read them yourself?
Yes, I think it's so important. I want to read books. Sorry, I'll say that again. I want to listen to books that are read by the author. And for me, that's important to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. And we'll have those links in the show notes, of course. So, finally, as we wrap up the conversation, Andrew, what action would you like our listener to take from today's conversation?
I would like you, listeners, and thank you for joining us, to wake up tomorrow and say, today I choose to be happy. This is my day. I'm just concentrating on making this 24 hours work. I will be kind to myself. I will be kind to the people around me. I will accept that I'm not going to be perfect, and that's okay. And I will continue to ask myself questions like, what do I like about living here? What do I like about my work? What do I love about my family? What's good about being me? And we find what we look for.
Excellent. Well, that's a very specific call to action with a bit of a list, a step by step guide as to how to execute. So, thanks for that, Andrew. And thanks for joining us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. All the best for the future. And please do stay in touch.
Thank you, Jürgen. I've enjoyed it too. It's been my pleasure, and I've been honored to chat with you.